I didn't know a baby name could become a weapon until the night my headlights caught my husband's half-sister slipping out of our front door like a thief who already felt entitled to our life. It was late, one of those nights when dinner is supposed to mean family, peace, normalcy. My husband, Ben, had invited his mother, Laura, and his half-sister, Vanessa, over. He said we should try again, like the past could be rinsed clean with a plate of food and polite smiles. I'd stepped out to pick up dinner, balancing takeout bags in my arms, already rehearsing my patience in my head. Then my headlights hit her. Vanessa froze on our walkway, the porch light behind her, turning her into a sharp silhouette. In her hands was a handcrafted wooden box, the one Ben kept tucked away because it wasn't just a box. It was legacy. Inside were his late grandfather's antique watches, pieces that had survived wars, moves, generations. Now worth more than most people's cars. For a half second, Vanessa's eyes met mine, wide, calculating. Then the box slipped. Wood struck concrete with a crack so loud it felt like it snapped something inside my chest. The lid popped, and watches spilled across the driveway like scattered teeth, metal flashing under my beams. "Vanessa!" I shouted, my voice coming out raw. She ran. She sprinted to Laura's car like she'd done nothing wrong, like I was the one interrupting her. I heard the front door bang open behind me, and Ben's footsteps hit the porch. Laura's voice followed, shrill, immediate, furious. Instead of horror, she screamed at us. "She doesn't deserve those anyway," Laura spat, pointing like the inheritance had personally insulted her. I stepped between them before Ben could, my hands lifted, trembling, not to fight, but to shield what was ours. That's when Laura lunged and scratched my face, hard enough that my skin burned and went wet. Blood, on a night that was supposed to be dinner. And while Ben dialed the police with shaking fingers, Vanessa and Laura sped off into the dark, leaving the cracked heirloom box behind like a punchline. That was only the beginning. Because 2 months later, after 4 years of infertility tears and whispered prayers, we finally held our newborn son, and Vanessa tried to steal something else, his name. Before I tell you what Vanessa did with my son's name, I need you to understand how I ended up in a family where love always comes with conditions, where boundaries are treated like insults, and forgive and forget is really just code for shut up and take it. My name is Nora. I'm 33, and on paper, my life looks steady. Stable job, a home my husband and I worked for, a marriage that's lasted through the kind of storms you don't post on social media. I'm not loud, I'm not dramatic. I'm the kind of woman who believes if you keep showing up with honesty, people eventually meet you there. That belief is what almost broke me. My husband, Ben, is also 33, warm in private, careful in public, the kind of man who learned early that peace is kept by not poking the bear. His bear has always been his mother, Laura. Laura is 56, and she has a talent for making every room feel like a court where she's the judge. Ben's childhood wasn't gentle. His parents divorced when he was little, around 4. Then Laura remarried a man named Doug. Ben doesn't like talking about Doug, but over the years, the truth came out in pieces. The yelling that made the walls feel too thin, the unpredictable moods, the discipline that crossed lines and left bruises you couldn't always see. When Ben was 7, Laura had another child, Vanessa, now 26. From that moment, the family story wrote itself. Vanessa became the golden child, the one whose tears mattered, whose mistakes were misunderstandings, whose bad behavior was just her personality. Ben became the one expected to adapt, to swallow, to be grateful for scraps of affection like they were a feast. The only real safety Ben had was his biological father, Richard, a genuinely good man, the kind who doesn't perform love. He just shows it. When Ben was 13, he asked to live with Richard full-time. Laura's reaction wasn't heartbreak. It was rage, because what she mourned wasn't her child. It was the control, the money, the image. Ben moved anyway, and even though he stayed polite, the distance never truly healed what had been broken. I met Ben in college when we were 19. I still remember him in a campus library, sleeves pushed up, hair falling into his eyes, smiling like he didn't realize he was doing it. We became friends first, real friends. Then dating, then the kind of relationship that turns into a shared life without you noticing the exact moment it happens. We've been together 14 years, married for 9. From the day Laura met me, she decided I was insufficient. Not because I treated Ben badly, never that. Not because I was cruel or careless. It was simpler, uglier. I wasn't impressive to her in the way she wanted. Laura speaks a language where money equals worth, status equals love. So when she looked at me, she didn't see a woman who would stand beside her son and build a stable home. She saw a woman she couldn't brag about. She made it clear in little ways at first, comments that were shaped like jokes. "Oh, you're sweet," she'd say, drawing the word out like it meant plain. Or, "Ben always had such big potential," as if marrying me was him settling. Vanessa at first barely acknowledged me. She was a teenager then, spoiled and sharp, drifting in and out of our house like it belonged to her. Ben, soft-hearted, hopeful, wanted her to like me. He wanted the story where siblings grow up and become friends again. I tried because I loved him, and because I didn't understand yet that some families don't want harmony. They want obedience. About 2 years after Vanessa started visiting more, something in her shifted. She stopped treating me like background noise and started treating me like a stage. Too close compliments, lingering touches, eyes that didn't flick away when mine caught hers. And I remember thinking, maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe she's just immature. Then one night, when Ben walked into the kitchen, Vanessa slid her hand onto my leg like she belonged there. And that was the first time I felt the cold truth settle under my ribs. This wasn't going to be a normal family. This was going to be a battle. I didn't say anything the first time. That's the part I still wrestle with, how instinctively I minimized what my body already knew was wrong. Vanessa's hand had rested on my leg for maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds too long. 2 seconds that made my stomach tighten and my skin crawl. I stood up so abruptly the chair scraped against the floor, loud enough that Ben turned around from the kitchen. Vanessa smiled like nothing had happened. I told myself it was awkward, misread, a fluke. But once your nervous system learns a pattern, it doesn't forget. After that night, Vanessa's behavior sharpened. It wasn't overt, not enough to point to without sounding paranoid, but it was consistent. She dressed differently when she knew Ben would be busy. She found excuses to be alone with me. She complimented my appearance with this syrupy intensity that felt less like admiration and more like ownership. "You're actually really attractive," she said once, tilting her head. "I don't know why Mom always said Ben could do better." I laughed it off because that's what women are trained to do. Smooth things over, absorb discomfort, keep the peace. But peace has a cost. The breaking point came one evening when Ben stepped into the shower and Vanessa followed me into the living room. She sat too close on the couch, her knee pressed against mine. "You know," she said, lowering her voice, "my sister doesn't really appreciate what she has." I stood up immediately. "That's not okay," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "You don't talk about your brother like that, and you don't touch me." Ben walked in mid-sentence. Vanessa snapped back like she'd been burned, her face twisting, not with guilt, but fury. "What are you implying?" she snapped. "I didn't do anything. I didn't have to explain." Ben had seen enough. He confronted her calmly, firmly. Vanessa exploded, called me dramatic, insecure, jealous. She said I was trying to turn Ben against his real family. Laura stormed in minutes later, summoned by Vanessa's tears, and without asking a single question, she took her daughter's side. "She would never do that," Laura said, glaring at me like I'd insulted her bloodline. "You're imagining things." That was the first time I realized something important. Truth didn't matter here. Loyalty did. After that, the family gatherings became minefields. At Thanksgiving, Vanessa cornered me in the hallway with her cousin Megan, smiling, whispering, suggesting things that made my skin crawl. I told Ben immediately. When he confronted them, Laura accused me of lying to cause drama. We left early, hearts pounding, hands clenched together like survival ropes. Laura insisted nothing change. "She's your sister," she said. "Family doesn't get cut off over misunderstandings." And Ben, still hopeful, still scarred by years of emotional conditioning, wanted to believe her. So we kept showing up. 2 years ago, Ben's paternal grandfather passed away. He left Ben something irreplaceable, an extensive vintage watch collection, some pieces dating back to the 1800s. Not just valuable, though the appraisal came back at over $150,000, but sacred. History held in metal and time. Laura and Vanessa attended the will reading. They were livid. Laura said it was unfair. Vanessa didn't say much, but her eyes lingered on the box like she was memorizing its shape. Laura threatened to contest the will, but nothing came of it. Eventually, she softened, or pretended to. She started calling more, being nicer, suggesting dinners. Ben wanted to believe it meant growth. I wanted to believe him. So when Laura invited us over recently, I agreed, despite the knot in my stomach that told me this piece was borrowed time. And that's how we ended up at that dinner. That's how I ended up driving back with takeout bags and catching Vanessa stealing what she thought she deserved. But even then, I didn't yet understand how far she was willing to go. Because the watches were only the first thing she tried to take from us. The police lights washed our driveway in red and blue, turning the scattered watches into sharp flashes of reflected panic. I remember kneeling on the concrete, my fingers hovering over one of the watches without touching it, afraid that if I moved anything, I'd somehow make this more real. Each piece lay where it had fallen, small and heavy with history. I could almost hear Ben's grandfather's voice in my head, the way he used to talk about craftsmanship, like it was a moral value. Behind me, Ben was shaking. Not violently, just enough that I noticed when he handed his phone to the officer. His voice was calm when he explained what happened, but I could hear the strain in every syllable. Laura wasn't calm. She paced, arms crossed tight over her chest, telling the officers they were overreacting, that Vanessa had misunderstood, that the box had been out in the open, as if that meant something sacred was suddenly public property. When the officer asked why Vanessa had run, Laura snapped, because she was scared. Anyone would be, being accused like this. I touched my face then and felt the sting, felt the wetness under my fingers. Blood. One of the officers noticed immediately. "Ma'am," he said gently, "did she do that?" I nodded. Laura laughed, actually laughed. "She walked into my arms," she said. "She's always been dramatic." That word again. Dramatic. The family's favorite way to erase discomfort. Vanessa and Laura were arrested that night, not in handcuffs, no spectacle, but escorted, processed, documented. The charges stuck. Community service, fines, consequences that felt too small for the violation they represented. Still, I thought, this is it. This is the moment reality finally breaks through denial. I was wrong. A week later, after the cracked antique box had been professionally restored, $600 that Laura reimbursed only when I threatened civil action, Ben and I sat on our bedroom floor, surrounded by baby books and half-folded laundry. I was exhausted in the deep cellular way that comes from years of trying to be reasonable. Ben reached for my hand. "There's something else we need to talk about," he said quietly. I knew before he finished the sentence. My body always knows first. I was 7 months pregnant then. After 4 years of negative tests, invasive appointments, whispered hopes that dissolved into bathroom tears, this pregnancy still felt fragile, as if joy itself might spook it away. We had chosen a name early, a boy's name, strong, gentle, carried forward with intention. James William. James, for Ben's Scottish grandfather, the same man whose watches had just been scattered across our driveway. William, because it fit, because it felt right, because some names don't need justification beyond belonging. We announced it online one quiet evening, a simple post with a blue heart and a sentence about legacy. Vanessa reacted within minutes. "She's going to use the same name," Ben said, his jaw tight. I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "She's 7 months pregnant too." She messaged saying she'd always loved the name James William. My stomach dropped so fast I had to put a hand on the bed to steady myself. "She has no connection to that name," I said. "None." "I know. We called her." Vanessa answered smug, already defensive. She said names weren't owned, that we didn't have a monopoly on grief or tradition. Her boyfriend, Mark, called later and threatened Ben, his voice thick with entitlement, promising we'd regret it if we didn't choose something else. We didn't budge. 2 months later, Vanessa gave birth. She named her son James William. When she called demanding congratulations, something in me snapped. Not loudly, not theatrically, just cleanly. Ben told her the truth, that after the attempted theft, after the lies, after the scratches and the gaslighting, he no longer considered her family, that our son would still carry his grandfather's name, that she didn't get to steal that, too. She screamed. She accused us of copying her. I listened, one hand on my stomach, feeling my son shift like he already understood the world he was being born into. When our baby arrived weeks later, tiny, perfect, real, we filled out the paperwork with steady hands. "James William," Vanessa called again, furious, incoherent. That's when Ben drew the final line. He told her she wasn't his sister anymore. And suddenly the family that had excused everything turned on us. Calls, messages, demands that we change our son's name, accusations that we were cruel, vindictive, selfish. I held my newborn and realized something terrifying and clarifying all at once. This wasn't about a name. It was about control, and they were willing to tear us apart to keep it. The first few days after James was born felt unreal, like joy and fear were sharing the same body, and neither wanted to let go. I remember lying in the hospital bed, James sleeping on my chest, his breath warm and uneven, his tiny fingers curling around nothing and everything at once. Ben sat beside me, eyes red-rimmed, one hand on our son's back like he was afraid James might disappear if he looked away. I wanted to freeze that moment. But reality doesn't wait for postpartum stitches to heal. The calls started before we were even discharged. Laura left a voicemail that began with, "I don't know who you think you are," and ended with, "You've humiliated this family." Vanessa sent paragraphs, screens of text that jumped from rage to victimhood to manipulation in seconds. Mark left a message for Ben that was half threat, half insult. I didn't listen to most of them. I couldn't. My body was in recovery mode, my hormones swinging like a pendulum, and every notification felt like someone knocking on the door of my chest. Ben tried to be strong for both of us, but I could see the old conditioning tugging at him. The reflex to fix things, to smooth it over, to apologize just to make the noise stop. One night, while James slept in his bassinet between us, Ben finally said it. Maybe we should have just picked a different middle name." I turned my head slowly and looked at him. Not angry, not yelling, just tired. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked quietly. He swallowed. "I just don't want this to tear the family apart." I reached out and took his hand, placing it over my chest so he could feel how fast my heart was beating. "They already tore it apart," I said. "We're just refusing to bleed for them anymore." He didn't answer right away. He stared at James instead, at the way our son's lips twitched in sleep, at the faint crease between his brows like he was already thinking deeply about the world. "I'm scared," Ben admitted, "of losing them, of becoming the bad guy." I understood that fear. I really did. But motherhood does something sharp and clarifying to you. "You're not the bad guy," I said. "You're a father now, and fathers don't sacrifice their children to keep their mothers comfortable." That was the first night Ben didn't return a single call. The next morning, I blocked numbers. Laura, Vanessa, Mark. It felt drastic, and also like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The silence that followed was strange. Not peaceful, not yet. More like standing in a house after a storm, listening for cracks you don't know how to fix. But the quiet didn't last. 2 weeks later, Mark showed up at our house at 11 p.m., drunk and pounding on the door while James slept in the next room. He shouted through the wood about stolen names, about ruined lives, about how we'd pay for this. Ben didn't open the door. He called the police. Watching him stand there, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders squared, not angry, not pleading, something shifted inside me. A piece of the man who used to apologize for existing finally went still. Mark was arrested that night, and 2 days later, Vanessa escalated again, this time through her cousin Megan, who showed up pretending to want peace, only to secretly record us, twist the story, and help spread rumors that cut deeper than threats. That Ben had been inappropriate with Vanessa when she was a teenager. That James might not even be Ben's. That I was manipulative, controlling, calculated. I read those words while feeding my son at 3 a.m. I didn't cry. I shook. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about protecting ourselves. This was about protecting James from a family that weaponized lies the way others used affection. By the time we filed for a restraining order, I was no longer confused. I was clear. They wanted access without accountability, obedience without respect. And I was done wondering if I was overreacting. I wasn't. I was reacting exactly as a mother should. Once we stopped reacting, they got louder. It was like flipping a switch. The moment Laura and Vanessa realized we weren't scrambling to explain ourselves anymore, that we weren't chasing their approval or trying to soften the truth, they escalated with a precision that told me this was never about misunderstanding. It was about control slipping through their fingers. The rumors spread fast. Family members we hadn't spoken to in years suddenly started calling, their voices stiff and awkward, asking questions that weren't really questions. "Is everything okay at home? Vanessa says there's been some confusion. Laura's worried about you." Worried. That word burned. Then Megan's edited video clips started circulating, carefully trimmed moments that made it look like we were aggressive, threatening, unstable. Ben's calm voice sounded cold when stripped of context. My firm boundaries looked like hostility when you cut away the provocation. We went to the police again. Sitting in that station with James asleep against my shoulder, I felt something in me harden, not into bitterness, but into resolve. I wasn't going to beg anyone to see me as human anymore. I was done trying to be palatable. The officer watched the security footage from our home, Mark drunk at the door, Megan refusing to leave, Laura's car circling the block more than once before driving away. "This is harassment," he said plainly, "and it's escalating." So we filed for a restraining order. Laura responded by filing a report of her own, claiming we had threatened her and Vanessa. When we were told, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. The same move, the same inversion of reality. Attack first, cry victim louder. At the hearing, our evidence spoke for us. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold. He just listened, and then granted the restraining order against Laura, Vanessa, and Megan. Watching Laura's face twist when the ruling came down was surreal. Not anger, something closer to disbelief. Like the universe had broken its contract with her. But even that didn't stop them. Anonymous packages began arriving at our door. Baby blankets with James Williams' name slashed through in black marker. Onesies labeled "Name Thief." Cards with no return address, filled with venom disguised as concern. One afternoon, our doorbell camera caught Megan's husband dropping one off. We reported it. She was fined. And still, the pressure didn't stop. It just changed shape. Laura and Vanessa filed a small claims lawsuit demanding $5,000 for emotional distress and financial hardship caused by the name dispute. Reading the filing felt like entering an alternate universe. They claimed we'd promised to change James's name. They claimed Vanessa had chosen the name first. They claimed we had destroyed her mental health. Our lawyer didn't even blink. "This has no merit," she said calmly, "but you'll still need to appear." Court wasn't dramatic, it was clinical. The judge reviewed the timeline, the police reports, the messages, the security footage, the attempted theft. He dismissed the case in minutes, then ordered them to pay our legal fees. Outside the courthouse, Laura tried to approach me, her face streaked with tears, hands outstretched like she wanted to grab onto something solid. Our lawyer stepped between us. We didn't engage. Driving home, Ben let out a breath I don't think he'd realized he was holding since childhood. A week later, something shifted. Vanessa sent a letter. A real one, not a text, not an email. She said she had legally changed her son's name to Marcus John. She admitted, on paper, that she had chosen James William out of spite. She said she wanted to turn over a new leaf. The letter ended with a request for money to cover the name change. We didn't respond. 3 days later, the truth surfaced. Mark had filed for primary custody of their son. Suddenly, Vanessa's remorse made sense. Her apology wasn't for us, it was for the court. Laura tried another angle. She showed up unannounced at Ben's father Richard's house, crying, claiming she wanted reconciliation. When Richard refused to pressure us into meeting, Laura exploded, demanding that I write a character reference for Vanessa. After everything, the neglect, the theft, the lies, the harassment. Richard told her no. She called him a traitor. By then, extended family members started pulling away from Laura, not because we asked them to, but because they saw the pattern clearly for the first time. They saw how far she was willing to go to punish anyone who said no. The restraining order was finalized. The noise quieted. Not because they accepted our boundaries, but because consequences finally outweighed manipulation. And in that quieter space, something unexpected happened inside me. I stopped doubting myself. I stopped replaying conversations, wondering if I'd been too harsh, too inflexible, too cold. I wasn't cold. I was awake. And I could feel a different version of myself emerging. Not reactive, not apologetic, not shrinking to fit into someone else's narrative. I was becoming someone my son could grow up safe beside. And that terrified them more than any lawsuit ever could. The quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like standing in a house after a fire. Everything still, air thick with smoke you couldn't see but could taste. The harassment had slowed, the court case was over. The restraining order sat folded in a drawer, like a shield we hoped we wouldn't need to lift again. And yet this was the moment I broke the most. James was 6 weeks old when the exhaustion finally caught me. Not the kind sleep fixes, the kind that settles into your bones and starts whispering lies when you're alone at night. I'd be up at 3 a.m., rocking him in the dim glow of the hallway light, my arms aching, my body still healing, my mind racing through everything we'd lost. Ben slept in short bursts, his face drawn even in rest. He had aged in months what should have taken years. Some nights, I stared at our son and felt a wave of guilt so heavy it made my chest hurt. Did we do this to him? Did my refusal to bend, to smooth things over, to be the bigger person, cost him grandparents, aunts, cousins? Did I choose boundaries over belonging and make him pay the price? Those thoughts came in the quiet, when there was no one to argue with, no text to block, no court dates to prepare for. Just me and the echo of every accusation I'd ever absorbed. Selfish, dramatic, divisive. One night, after a particularly brutal stretch of no sleep, Ben found me sitting on the nursery floor, James crying softly in his crib while I stared at the wall like I'd forgotten how to move. "I don't think I can do this," I whispered. Ben knelt in front of me instantly. "Do what?" "All of it," I said. "Being the wall, being the bad guy, being the reason your family disappeared." His face tightened. "Nora..." "I know," I interrupted. "I know what you're going to say, but knowing doesn't make it stop hurting." He pulled me into his chest, and I finally cried. Not the sharp, angry tears I'd shed during the chaos, but the quiet ones that slip out when you're too tired to hold them back. "I miss the idea of a family," I said. "Not them. Just the idea that it didn't have to be this hard." Ben rested his forehead against mine. "So do I," he admitted. "And some days I hate that I still want their approval." That honesty cracked something open between us. Because this wasn't a clean victory story. There was no moment where everything suddenly felt worth it. There were days I replayed Laura's words in my head and wondered if maybe I was too rigid. Days I imagined an alternate version of myself, one who smiled, nodded, changed the name, absorbed the disrespect, kept the peace. That version of me would have been invited to holidays. That version of me wouldn't have needed a restraining order. That version of me also would have disappeared. The lowest moment came quietly. A message slipped through, sent from a new number I didn't recognize. "I hope James grows up kinder than you." I stared at the screen, my hands numb. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was the kind of message meant to burrow into a mother's doubt and rot there. I held James tighter than I should have, and had to consciously loosen my grip so I didn't wake him. I went into the bathroom and threw up. Not from illness, from grief. Grief for the family. I thought Ben and I would have. Grief for the version of myself who believed love was enough to fix everything. Grief for the years I spent trying to be reasonable in rooms that rewarded cruelty. That night, I finally admitted something I'd been avoiding. I wasn't just protecting James from them. I was protecting him from growing up watching his mother disappear piece by piece to make others comfortable. And that realization didn't feel empowering at first. It felt devastating, because it meant there was no going back. No version of this story where everyone hugged it out and learned their lesson. Some people don't learn. They just lose access. I lay awake until morning, James asleep beside me, the sky lightening inch by inch. And somewhere between night and dawn, something inside me shifted, not into confidence, not into strength, but into acceptance. This was the cost of truth, and I was already paying it. The turning point didn't arrive with a confrontation. It came with paperwork. An envelope sat in our mailbox one quiet afternoon, thick, official-looking, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even open it. Ben brought it inside and set it on the counter like it might bite. For a long moment, we just stared at it. "I can't do another lawsuit," I said softly. Ben nodded. "Me neither." But when we opened it, it wasn't another attack. Inside were legal documents confirming that Vanessa had formally changed her son's name to Marcus John, not just socially, but legally. Attached was a notarized statement acknowledging that she had no claim to the name James William and relinquished any objection to our use of it. No request for money, no manipulation, no demand for contact. Just facts. I sat down at the table and let the papers rest in my hands, my pulse slowing as I read each line twice. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of a long, exhausting sentence. Ben exhaled slowly. "Do you think it's real?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's binding." We showed everything to our lawyer. She confirmed it was legitimate. For the first time in months, there was nothing to respond to, nothing to defend, nothing to brace for. A week later, Ben's father, Richard, called. He sounded careful, measured, the way someone does when they're carrying information they don't want to weaponize. "Vanessa reached out to me," he said, "not to pass along a message, just to apologize. To me." That caught me off guard. According to Richard, she'd admitted something she'd never said out loud before, that she'd been raised to believe she was entitled to whatever she wanted, that watching her son placed under supervised visitation had forced her to confront how destructive her behavior had become. "She didn't ask about you," Richard added gently, "and I didn't bring you up." I appreciated that more than he knew. Then came another surprise. Laura was released from jail after violating the restraining order. Instead of lashing out, she enrolled in anger management classes, started therapy, quietly, without announcement. Richard said she wanted to apologize, in person, but only if we were willing. Ben and I talked about it for days. I wasn't eager, I wasn't hopeful, but I was curious. Not about reconciliation, about closure. I agreed to a meeting under very specific conditions. Public place, Richard present, no discussion about access to James. Ben stayed home with our son. I walked into that cafe braced for manipulation. Instead, Laura looked smaller. Not humbled, not redeemed, just tired. She apologized. Not the slippery kind. Not, "I'm sorry you felt that way." She admitted favoring Vanessa, admitted failing Ben as a mother, admitted that jealousy over the inheritance and resentment toward Richard had fueled her behavior. She even confessed, without being prompted, that she'd encouraged Vanessa's inappropriate attention toward Ben, hoping it would break our marriage. That one landed like a stone in my chest. I listened without interrupting. Then I spoke. I told her that apologies don't erase patterns, that words don't undo damage, that even if she was changing, I wasn't obligated to let her back into my life, or my child's. She nodded. "I understand," she said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to take responsibility." She handed me a check covering the cost of the restored watch box, plus extra. I didn't keep it. Ben and I donated the money to a counseling center for families navigating abuse and boundary repair. When I left that cafe, I didn't feel lighter, but I felt finished. Back home, I picked James up and held him against my chest. He smelled like milk and clean cotton and possibility. And for the first time since he was born, I didn't feel like I was defending our life anymore. I was living it. That's when I understood the shift. Power doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like no longer needing to explain yourself. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came quietly, in fragments, through secondhand updates, awkward silences, and the way certain names stopped appearing in group chats we no longer belonged to. Laura and Vanessa didn't implode publicly. There was no dramatic apology tour, no social media reckoning. What they lost was subtler and far more permanent. Access. The family orbit shifted without us ever pushing it. Relatives who had once hovered on the sidelines began choosing distance, not because we demanded loyalty, but because Laura and Vanessa made proximity exhausting. Conversations with them became repetitive, bitter, obsessed with grievances that no longer landed anywhere. People get tired of carrying someone else's rage. Vanessa's custody ruling became public knowledge in the family, supervised visitation only. Whispers followed. Questions. Doubt. The narrative that had once painted her as misunderstood started cracking under its own weight. Laura retreated inward. Therapy became her new refrain, something she spoke about carefully, like a shield. Some family members admired the effort, others remained skeptical. What was undeniable was this: she no longer had the authority she once wielded. The matriarch without a court. Ben's relationship with his extended family changed too. Some drifted away, uncomfortable with boundaries they didn't know how to navigate. Others stepped closer, quietly, without fanfare. A few apologized for believing lies they hadn't bothered to question. Ben didn't demand explanations. He accepted what felt sincere and let the rest go. And that, more than anything, unsettled people who expected him to chase approval. At home, life softened. James grew chubbier, louder, more present. He smiled with his whole face. He slept in longer stretches. He didn't know his name had once been contested like territory. To him, it was just the sound we used when we lifted him from his crib. James William. The watch collection moved to a safety deposit box, protected, preserved. One piece remained on our mantle, chosen intentionally. Not the most valuable, the most storied. A promise waiting. I returned to work part-time and felt like myself again. Not the woman braced for impact, but someone grounded in something solid. My body healed. My thoughts slowed. The constant hum of anxiety dulled into background noise. Ben changed too. He stopped flinching when his phone buzzed. Stopped explaining his choices before anyone asked. I saw him become the man he might have been if he'd grown up with fewer conditions attached to love. Some nights we talked about what we lost. Other nights we talked about what we built. And slowly I stopped wondering if we'd done the right thing. Because the question had changed. It was no longer, could we have handled this better? It was, who are we now because we didn't break? Laura reached out once more through Richard, asking gently if someday she might be allowed to know her grandson. I told Richard to tell her the truth. Maybe, but not yet, and not without consistency. No promises, no timelines, Just reality. She accepted it. That too was fallout. The loss of leverage. The end of entitlement. And the beginning of something that might one day resemble accountability, but would never again be accessed by default. Ben and I didn't celebrate. We didn't toast to victory. We sat on the couch one evening, James asleep between us, the house quiet in a way that felt earned. "I think this is what peace looks like," Ben said softly. I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Not the absence of conflict," I replied, "the absence of fear." And for the first time since the driveway cracked open under the weight of stolen watches, I believed it. I used to believe that family was something you protected at all costs. That love meant endurance, silence, flexibility that bent until it snapped and still called itself loyalty. Motherhood changed that belief, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in the quiet moments that rewired my instincts, in the way James's weight settled against my chest, in how his cry cut through my thoughts and told me, with absolute clarity, what mattered and what didn't. I didn't win anything. I lost relationships I thought were permanent. I lost the fantasy that time and patience could soften people who had no interest in changing. I lost the illusion that doing the right thing always earns understanding. But I gained something far more durable. I gained the ability to choose myself without apologizing. I learned that boundaries don't destroy families. They reveal them. They show you who can love without control and who only loves when you comply. They show you who respects your no and who sees it as a challenge. James will grow up without knowing the version of me who swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. He won't watch his mother shrink in rooms where she's unwelcome. He won't learn that love requires self-erasure. Instead, he'll learn that his name carries history because it was protected, not because it was uncontested. And one day, when he's old enough to ask why certain people aren't in our lives, I won't lie. I won't poison him with bitterness either. I'll tell him the truth in language he can carry. That sometimes the bravest thing a family can do is change its shape. Ben and I still don't know what the future holds. Maybe there will be reconnections. Maybe there won't. Maybe healing will come slowly, unevenly, or not at all. But we stopped waiting for permission to live our lives. And that, I've learned, is the moment everything actually begins. If there's one lesson I'd leave with anyone listening to this story, it's this. You are not cruel for protecting what you love. You are not selfish for refusing to be mistreated. And peace is not something you negotiate with people who benefit from your silence. Sometimes the family you save is the one you're building, right in front of you. And sometimes that's enough.